welcome.
Ooh.
I finally get to say something I've been waiting to say all year. Welcome from snowy Minnesota. we,
First time of the year.
believe it or not, it's our first real snowfall in Minnesota on March 22nd, which is just wild to say. We're going to get about a foot to 2 feet between now and Sunday night. So my kids are happy they can go play in the snow, and they might get an extra day of spring break. So who doesn't love that as a kid, right?
Nice.
Um, Tim, how's the weather out there in New York?
Oh, I mean, obviously I'm decked out here. It's it was like 20, 25 this morning, but windy, so pretty mean. And this building is built in 1921, so not the best. Not the
It's
best.
crazy. It's just
Radiator
the first
heating.
snowfall in
But
Minnesota.
yeah,
so
no, welcome back. Thanks again for attending. Tim Golden is in sunny Hilton Head, South Carolina, playing golf with his buddies. So he is still out on the golf course. I don't think he'll be checking in, but
What a jerk.
yeah.
We got a nice
Excited to have Mr. Palo Alto, Sention, Zach Kronkowski, which I'm sure the weather's a little better.
no snow out here, but I will say from South Bend, Indiana, and yeah, plenty of snow. And my mom texted me, I think last week it was snowing, and I thought that season was over. So glad to be in California now.
Yeah.
Awesome. And why don't we just do full introductions? Henry, Mr. New Jersey, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Founder of Sention, co-founder. Sorry, Zach hates it when I say founder. Co-founder of Sention. We do browser hardening, servers, workstations for CIS benchmarks. Zach does his pitch a lot better than I do, but I have my hands full with touching the settings every day and doing some dev work. I'm also not enjoying the 1 week of cold weather we have. I think, Tim, it's like cold this week, it's warm next week, and it was warm the week before. So perfect, make me sick weather, which I always enjoy.
Yeah, another back and forth. No good. Zach, anything else to add?
Zach-
Talk about, yeah.
Give me the pitch.
Zach,
Always
give us the
happy.
real pitch.
Well, I mean, on the topic of weather too, CompTIA CCF in Chicago was fortunately like the warm weather of that week, and I would have hated if that was cold again. So good timing of the year for that. But yes, so co-founder to Henry over at Sention. I handle a lot more of the external, customer-facing, onboarding, success, sales, marketing. If you see a post on LinkedIn, it is probably made by myself and then revised by my wife, who makes it pretty. But yeah, Henry, as he introduced, he is the hands-on glass, understands these GPOs better than anyone I know. Absolutely incredible. And my job is to really introduce and educate on these settings, why they're important, and ultimately introduce how Sention is able to remediate and standardize about 1,000 different security settings across workstations, servers, and browsers, all to CIS standards.
Nice. I'll go next. So yeah, Jesse Miller, founder of Power PSA Consulting. We help MSPs scale security programs and do it profitably. Tim.
Awesome. So Tim Schnur, Inquisitive IT, New York City privacy consultant. We also do a little MSP work, a little bit of Google focus, some Microsoft clients as well. But on the topic today of browser security and why it matters so much, I'll start. And like I said, Jesse knows this, but I'm a big fan of the Google Workspace suite, formerly G Suite. But many things are very, in a very browser centric, right? Like they're just the way the workflow is kind of coming through, like almost everything's based on the browser, right? Even your email, like Gmail, calendar, they were kind of maybe a decade before kind of Microsoft moved to Microsoft 365. But you start to work in that environment, you realize the verticality of the security, how much the browser is important to basically cybersecurity posture, which we'll go through today. But we're gonna kind of cover why it matters. I think, we'll each pick kind of what our favorite advantages of it, and then, we'll go through that. We got a couple things to share as well. And Zack and Henry might have a little bit of a, maybe
So we
a
have
hint
our
on
we
like
have
what
our
they're
own
working for in
opinions.
the future here, but hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that as well. So,
Yes. So
yeah.
this is a really cool opportunity for us. So we really, for the last year plus, we've been hardening workstations and servers. And what we've realized from working with the MSPs is they want to start taking that next step to make a more secure perimeter. And as Tim was introducing, that browser, whether it's Chrome, Edge, Firefox, it's become this container filled of just all of the SaaS apps. And today, not a lot of these settings are being put into place. And it's not because they don't want to. It's because there's not a really good medium to actually change and standardize these settings for MSPs, because you guys are doing it multi-tenancy. A lot of the enterprises out there can handle this because it's just one enterprise. There's not really a solution for this at the multi-tenant level. So that's ultimately what Sention is working to do. And to kind of put a bow on what browser hardening is and the scope that we're going to talk about today is it's the modification of various settings on the browser, and that we got Tim Golden here, the golfer hopping in.
Just coming to rub it in everyone's face. Love it.
Hey,
On this time
everybody.
vacation.
Better late than never, right?
Any hole-in-ones?
No, I got a lot of broken things, but we're good. I came in, say hello. You guys got this awesome. I'm going to kind of listen in the background, have it running in the background. And hey, Zach, Henry, Tim, Jesse, good to see you all.
Good to see you. Good to see you. It looks like you're sitting on the clubs in the back or something. Oh, there.
No,
I got a lot of broken things.
driving to the next hole. So beautiful here in South Carolina. But hey, have a good rest of your stream.
We'll talk to you next week.
I still loving the weather.
Golfer.
So I would actually like to hear from the audience. How many of you are doing, are doing some sort of offering or some sort of structure around browser security for your clients today? And if there's anyone doing it, I'd love to hear about that. But I think you're right, Zach, in that what I've seen is that is kind of uncharted territory for MSPs currently, right? Especially with the small and medium-sized businesses. It's just there's so many settings, there's so many problems, there's so many. Then there's been a lack of real good controls at a price point that SMBs can digest. So I guess would like to hear your comments on that, and then maybe Henry's as well.
Yeah, and I'll intro that one too, because we have been really just, I guess, researching the market, right? There's a reason we prioritize this development, and that's because it was being asked for. But when I bring up browser hardening today to the majority of MSPs, they go, yeah, I don't want my client saving passwords to the browser. And I would say the majority of MSPs today do allow that because they don't have a medium to disable that. Right. The only way that they've really introduced to me is using Kelvin's SIP tool, which is absolutely amazing. But at the same time, that one disabling the password, browser saving password, is one of about 88 different security recommendations.
Right.
So why are you doing only the one that appears to be the most important or most important when there's dozens more that you can harden to secure your clients? Right. And that's really the mission Sention's on to solve for the market. Yeah. But Henry, please feel free.
I mean, I think you put that pretty well. For me, the thought process is pretty much the same as it is for workstation servers, right? You're using, the browser's the tool you're using to get your job done, to do something that you need to do for work function or whatever it is. And it just so happens that these days, pretty much everything goes through the browser, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we've seen a couple solutions pop up recently for like enterprise managed browsers. I'm thinking about some tools that I don't actually know what their price points are, but like you can quote unquote totally move off of Chrome or totally move off of Firefox to another enterprise browser. But it's sort of difficult to do so because you're trying to teach somebody a new tool. You got to teach an old dog a new trick, if you will. And a lot of times I think they're not quite as sophisticated when it comes to that. So we're just looking for the happy medium. Chrome, you can stay on Firefox. You're familiar with. Just make it that little extra bit secure. So I will say some of those things are disturbing to develop, but
Your audio is cutting out a little, Henry.
is
In
it?
and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like every other word. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
to what Henry was getting at, we have seen a lot of products come to market, and I think it's okay to shout those out on this
Yeah,
format. But like,
I give a shout out to Dan Lee. He gave me a wonderful kind of demo of they got acquired by Palo Alto. What was the name of the
I think
Talon.
they're using Talon, right?
Talon? Yeah,
Yeah.
and they used Talon, and I was like, Dan, you guys, and this is from my experience working at banks and being a Big Four consultant. I've worked in all these financial services firms, and like the browser's a brick. It doesn't do anything. It lets you into the business systems. It doesn't let you do anything else. And I was like, firmly have control with Talon here. So, but Talon, is not something we see at MSPs, right? It's usually an enterprise tool. So.
yeah, and same with Talon. There's another one like called Island IO, and what
Yeah.
Henry was saying is there's solutions out there that completely replace needing to use Chrome or replace needing to use Edge, and it's this own standalone solution. And there's like a big barrier. The SMB doesn't want to learn a new browser, doesn't want to switch. And to that extent, the example I provided is a very much enterprise, like Fortune 100 solution. So not for MSPs, right? Again, goes back to a lot of solutions not being designed for MSP capabilities or price point. So really at Sention, we kept on hearing the feedback and we're like, well, if we can let them continue to keep the browser, but still secure it and manage the settings, would that be valuable? And so far it's been a resounding yes. And we're excited to release that in just a couple weeks.
A lot of that ends up being compatibility, though, too, right? I think, Tim, you mentioned Google Workspaces. I guess the name of the service now is sort of a pretty useful one for MSPs. And I think compatibility-wise, I mean, you're not going to find a browser that beats using Chrome when it comes to
Right.
Google Workspace compatibility. So,
Yeah, I think, and I know certain small businesses that I'm just friendly with. An actual friend of mine here locally runs a medical practice, several locations, and doesn't have an IT guy. He worked for an MSP in college, and he runs Google Workspace everywhere. Everything's auto-deployed. Everything is in an enterprise browser. Everything's secured. But he built it that way from the ground up. It's really hard to come into, let's say, a professional services or architecture firm that needs Windows and has, you're just trying to get them to get off software that's not supported anymore off of Windows 7 or something like that. It's a much more different proposition there. So I think that is really where the pain points come in for those types of solutions. The other thing, as we were talking about this, I was thinking about it, and it really... There's that trite saying, X is the new perimeter, right? This identity is the new perimeter, and now browsers are the new perimeter. And so I saw somebody post something. If I hear one more person say X is the new perimeter, I'm going to lose it, So and I kind of laughed. But here's the thing, that just goes to show that attackers are going to be like water. They're going to flow to the area of least resistance, and so it's an arms race, right? Initially, Windows and workstations. Remember, it wasn't a firewall. Now it was the endpoint is the new perimeter. Okay, the arms race continues. We get CrowdStrike, to name a vendor. There's plenty of other ones out there. Huntress, any of those that provide EDR protection. Now the attackers, that's not a viable target for them. Okay, where do they go now? Oh, we can go to the cloud. We can use identity to do business email compromise. Oh, okay. Now we're getting good cloud protection. Everyone's using MFA. Well, now what can we do? We know their browsers aren't configured, and we could scrape passwords right out of a browser. So it's just going to continue to go that way. And so I think this is the next iteration of, the Wild West, so to speak, for MSPs to be able to protect their clients. And so that's why I think it's important, right?
I love that you said Wild West. And I mean, we've used that term throughout, but it kind of hit me a little bit differently just hearing that story, because when we go on to a platform, whether it's hardening the workstation, hardening the server, or hardening browsers, people are like, oh, yeah, it's connected to the domain. Everything's the same. That's how domain works. Okay, let's take a look at what those local policies are actually set to. And even in onboarding I did today, every single machine we onboarded had a different combination of settings. And they didn't have a good explanation. They expected it to be the same. But that's the reality. All of these settings, all these configurations across thousands of endpoints, it's the Wild West. When your MSP needs to troubleshoot something, they don't even know what they're going into because the GPOs today are not standardized, even if the domain says they are.
Right. Well, I love that idea of standardization. That was what my post was focused on LinkedIn this morning. Is that one of the things to talk with clients is not security as a negative or a zero sum game where we're going to stop the bad things from happening to you, and it's going to cost you X amount, but you're probably not going to have to pay X amount in a ransom attack, right? How about taking the offensive and saying security is a byproduct of quality, right? And so if we can bring quality to your environment, that's going to, in essence, create security, but it's also going to create other good business outcomes, such as troubleshooting improves, breakdowns improves, your browser doesn't load or doesn't do something right because your setting's wrong. But if it's you've standardized that across the fleet, all of a sudden it becomes much more efficient, less breakdowns, everyone is more productive. So that is a positive outcome of using a quality focus to security, right?
Yep. So I probably shared a little early, but if you guys have any to add on here, I also commented to the audience, please add your thoughts on this if you think we're wrong or we're missing some here.
Yeah.
But I just, sitting around this morning, I thought up like these 13, right? And some of them overlap and are kind of the same. Zach mentioned DNS filtering and your domain and things like that. But everything goes through the browser, right? Jesse, I mean, as you talked about, like EDR, it's a big focus, right? Like because it's the ingress egress of pretty much everything coming in and out. So,
right.
but there are your ability to lock things down is pretty dramatic, right? You could basically just have an allow list of 5 websites that your business uses, like, and it's probably like a SaaS application, right? Like Salesforce, email. If you really wanted to lock things down, and I've been there, trust me, I've logged into some of these, insurance company systems or something like that, and there's not much there. Yeah, there's not much surface area to basically attack. But you can also look at like, and funny, Jesse, you just said like water flows, right? Like, and I think John Harden said the same thing about shadow IT. It's like employees will find a way to like basically get the job done by using some other tool, even though it's not the authorized tool of the firm. So, just the ability to see everything that's coming, what employees are doing, SaaS license usage. Like, did you pay for 10 licenses and only one person in the firm is using the license, right? Like, so just the unbelievable amount of analytics. You can use it for blocking and tackling if you want to, or you can use it from purely just an analytics and insights perspective. But Zach, I think a lot of the things you mentioned in terms of those Chrome, and I think you're going to pull up the CIS controls for Chrome, which I don't think I've looked too far into, but how much of that overlaps with this kind of some of these advantages or capabilities?
So there's definitely some on this screen, and Henry, you're the one developing these settings, so let's.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them probably upload, download permissions get a lot of overlap, allow listing. Malware command blocking is an interesting one because it's sort of tangentially related. The way we look at it is probably more going to be like preventing cross-site scripting specifically, but extensions, plugins, all that kind of stuff, definitely a lot of overlap, right? So the way we like to think about it, I guess, is anything you consider a capability probably is going to have a flip side on the coin when it comes to security and be able to lock it down a little bit more.
Yeah. It's interesting, while we're talking about this is, and I mentioned this in the green room, is I think we're moving towards a world where the endpoint is more and more ephemeral, right? The endpoint doesn't matter. People are using a wide range of different endpoints, and yes, you can lock it down to say you can only use an authorized laptop and these 5 apps. But at the end of the day, if we're talking small business and work getting done, it's just not realistic, right? We want to reduce friction for the employees to do their job. And so how can we do that? We can push security to the core and use a zero trust mentality when we're doing things, and how do we do that? Like, pragmatically as a defender, I'm always thinking, where can I capture the best data and where are the choke points in my data flows, right? So the choke point can be the browser, and because they have to use the browser to enter the application, no matter what device they're coming from. And if I can control that doorway, I'm a lot better off, and I'm getting a lot better data, and I'm able to defend better as a defender at the end of the day, right?
That's the other big thing I want to emphasize during this call. So we do, like I said, hardened workstation, servers, browsers, right? By having this standardized and in a format that is secure, you're increasing the efficacy of your other security layers, right?
Mhm.
CrowdStrike we called out. It's looking for anomalies. It's analyzing behavior. If you harden and standardize these systems, you're forcing very redundant behavior, the same things every day, allowing for those anomalies to be more apparent, allowing for CrowdStrike to react better, less false positives, quicker remediation time, right?
Right.
So can't emphasize the importance enough of the topic we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a couple of these other things, and Jesse mentioned zero trust, right? Like when I'm looking at it from a privacy perspective, I focus on malicious insider threat, right? How many employees walk out with like a customer list? This is kind of the ultimate tool, right? The blocker, right? Like if you can get rid of screenshotting, you can get rid of them sending a list to their Gmail or to some non-sanctioned like data repository, like a Dropbox or something like that. You're really taking a lot of the risk off the table here for, kind of malicious insider. And they'll be pretty well aware that like the company's watching them as well. So that coupled with a good kind of employee contract, NDA, confidentiality agreement, like they'll have a pretty good understanding of like what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So, but as you also mentioned, Jesse, like they should be able to check the weather. They should be able to check
Right.
Google Maps on the way home. I don't know.
Right.
So, I've been in situations where like the browser just doesn't do anything. The bookmarks up here on the Chrome bar are like employee awareness training. All the kind of like corporate assets. It's like everything on the browser is meant for you to do your job or help you kind of navigate the company. So I think for most MSPs or outsourced IT, they're going to have some happy medium. And I think it's a good idea to start with just turning something on, thinking about like the analytics and functionality of it and starting to clamp down as you go. I think with a similar conversation, right, Jesse, with like application waitlisting, like a threat locker or something like that. But
that's a great point. I'd love to hear from you, Henry, to put you on the spot. If you had to say to MSPs to start getting a handle on this, what are the top 5 things they should go do and standardize across their browser fleet right now?
Top 5? Probably,
or top 3 or top 1?
3, top 5. Well, I guess the top one, I learned about this one recently. There's a Chrome API, I guess you call it, called WebUSB. I think I just learned about this today. And that'll let your browser just directly access any USB ports you got plugged in, data stores, things like that. And so I've been reading about some vulnerabilities that let you bypass hardware encryption or like hardware two-factor, like YubiKeys, keys, things like that. So that's probably number 1 just for recency bias for me. Other than that, I mean, there's a lot of protections for phishing, for drive-by security, plugins, things like that. So just ensuring you've only got approved plugins. Some of these things are. Oh, go ahead.
That's a great one, I think, is locking down your plugins, right? So we can do some of that with Intune and obviously Google Workspace and stuff, but I think the tools are available. It's just kind of sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to have to go do this, because at the end of the day, and I think that's another great piece to your point, Tim, for employee usage on sites and what apps are being used. That's a great piece to bring into your SBR, is we have a list of all the applications or all the plugins your browsers are using. Should we be using all these? Can we shrink that list, right? Because as you said, the more you have to cover, the more chance there is for things to break. So, great slide here, Tim. A good segue into that. So I'll let you introduce
right
this
into
one.
what you were saying. Yeah. So, the biggest thing is when as product, you guys are Sention's a product, right, for MSP vendors.
Right.
How do you get them to tell the story back to a non-technical business owner, right? And I think I was just trying to include a slide on this, right? Like, we're talking, some of this stuff is a little geeky, but like, let's talk about the actual, how does it relate to their business? And I think these are 5 I could think of this morning, right? Like, clearly it's going to help with insurance. Like, I'm sure Fitball would love this. Lower chance of breach, right? Like, because if the executables on business email compromise don't go through, the kind of the insider threat, like, have you ever had an employee walk out with a customer list? Like, that's a pretty easy story for an MSP to like ask a small business owner. Licensing, it's interesting because when I worked at the Big Four, this was like a huge business, was like actually rationalizing companies. Companies will have 20, 30 SaaS licenses, and what are they actually using? It's the same thing, like from a personal basis. Like, are you really watching Netflix, Prime, and right? Like, there's apps that do that, right, from a personal basis. But like, you think about like the company's SaaS appetite or expenses in a year, like this will give you a lot of insights. And I remember when John Harden came on from Sassio, he told me like the biggest thing that resonated with small businesses was just to see kind of like where they were using licenses and like what websites they were on, like the majority of the day. Really kind of gives them a lot of insights on like what's really happening, like how's the job actually happening, even though they run the company. So
there's a layer I think above that too when it comes to sort of SaaS licensing that I've seen more so at large enterprises, but I think even for small businesses, you start to get a little fatigued with the amount of different licenses you're trying to manage, trying to understand that. And the experience I've had is it gets to a point where when somebody on a team is looking for the newest tool, the company's just going to tell them find the lowest bidder, right? Because they just don't really have a handle on it anymore. So if it does whatever you need it to do, find the lowest priced one, right? And so we've had situations where they've actually had to move off of a platform they've been on for 10 plus years because somebody else is coming out with one that does less, but it's cheaper. And so I think being able to get a grapple on that and making sure that you're getting licenses that you actually need or will actually do the job function for you is pretty important there as well.
Yeah, so I think this is probably easier to sell than most tools. Like Jesse trying to talk to a small business owner on like selling XDR, like, yeah, maybe not so easy, right? Or even dark web monitoring is like, just I guess some of the tools that are out there. Yeah,
and I think getting in the weeds on the types of different tools that each one what it does. If they want that, great. If you're talking to them and they have the IT manager sitting in the meeting and they're like, well, what about this and what about that? You gotta satisfy them and answer those questions. But even typically from like a results perspective, I'm going to have XDR and I'm going to have an endpoint configuration manager and I'm going to have a browser configuration manager. And do I talk about all those different things? No, I talk about quality outcomes as we standardize and streamline your environment to make sure your people are working 99.9% of the time, right? That's the outcome that they want, and how they get there is really secondary or ancillary to the business owner. So I think that's the way to approach it, right?
Yeah, yep. I think the concept of control is important when talking about these configurations. Right. And I did, something we offer over at Sention is, I'll go and present Sention to your customers for you, right? That's just part of the process that I offer. And I got to do that yesterday. And, I did introduce that control aspect. Hardening your workstations, hardening your servers is going to tell you, making sure your employees are using that inactivity timeout or what they're doing and making sure they can't go outside of their scope easily, because something we also do is configure all the user rights assignments. So it's making sure that people only have the right access they need. And he wasn't as interested about that from his perspective. And he is the IT manager and I think IT ops side of it. But where he really cared about was seeing that these default configurations and the state that they were actually in. So in this example, on the OS level, there was a store passwords using reversible encryption, right? He had that setting enabled. So reversible encryption was perfectly accessible. And when he saw that, he was no longer thinking about that control aspect. He's just like, holy crap, this is a real security risk, and it's already on my system. This third-party software, Sention, is telling me this is in place and can be taken advantage of. So that's when the conversation really shifted from, hey, here's all the control aspects and all the streamline and standardizing benefits. Here's a real thing, and that's what really turned him into a security buyer as opposed to just a control my employees buyer.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely valid because you have to know who you're talking to, right? So if it is the IT manager or somebody who's the IT ops person, they're going to understand that context and the ramifications, right? And if it's a decision maker who says, I just want business outcomes and I want my business to run better, and at the end of the day, I want the bottom line to be better and be protected and get a competitive advantage in the market, right? That's the way to approach that conversation. So,
Zach, when you want to try to share your
Yeah.
that list? I'm
So
just curious to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really entertaining with what we do, and I'll pull this up, is we do base our entire solution, Sention, off of the CIS standards. You'll hear me say that this entire time. And people don't realize these CIS standards that we are doing come from an extremely long PDF. So the one, once this is populated on the screen, is going to be the PDF just to harden a single Chrome browser. They have, and that is going to share momentarily, right? I think it's in the background.
Maybe I got to share it. Yeah.
I know. Okay, there it goes. So this PDF here is just to harden a Google Chrome browser. And you'll notice this is 232 pages, right?
That's
This
the
is made
outdated
up.
one.
Okay, this isn't the most up to date. I guess I have an old one, but and they keep on modernizing. Another reason, actually, I mean that's another reason these are so hard to manage. Updates come out, PDFs get old, hence example A, and your engineers can't be that up-to-date expert on all GPOs. So that's just a cool thing that we get to do for our partners. And here is this Web USB API one that Henry was talking about. But yeah, this is 200 some pages. That's not something an engineer wants to read. And then if they do read it, they need to understand each setting, create the PowerShell script, configure this at the browser, right? It's just a ton of work to get this done. And when you add in hardening a workstation and hardening a server, the amount of pages go into the multi-thousands. I think to do all of the workstation, server, and browser combined is about 2,800 pages of reading. No one wants to do that. So that's the really big thing here. And yeah, just an overview of some of these settings. I mean, have you seen this before, Tim or Jesse? Is this new to you?
I have, yeah. And, I think it's, like you said, it's something where absolutely when you can use a tool to streamline and get your baseline, I think people probably watching this will agree with me. The CIS controls, typically, if you're looking at, let's say, for a server, right, you go and push the recommended CIS controls out, you break almost everything on that server by doing it. So I think there is a place where you do have to review them, and you do have to understand what they're doing, and you do have to get a baseline, right? But you definitely don't want to have to enter that in every single time on every single machine. So you do need to understand them. Unfortunately, you are going to have to read and you are going to have to understand it. So I want to encourage people to do that, right? You need to know the technology that you're deploying. But, being from an operations background, and that's what I do is help MSPs scale their security practices, you absolutely need to have a repeatable way and a simple and streamlined and an automated way to be able to push those security settings out once you do have a baseline. So again, I think there's both pieces to that.
And I love that you said like pushing this out will break something. That's something we hear all the time. And I really want to advocate, especially for our partner base, they are pushing the majority of these out. As you can see in this share, and I can zoom in if that helps, but there are L1s and L2s. So
Right.
level 1 is more targeted at, hey, these are just best practice.
Yeah.
Like the end client, that user on the machine, probably won't get mad. They might get a little annoyed, but they're not going to be freaking out, not able to do their job. I mean, let's look at one of these. Block external extensions, right? So this is if they want to probably install an extension that is not already approved. So this
Not part of the Chrome Web Store.
Not part of the Chrome Web Store. So this would be annoying for them, but also now they can create a ticket, reach out to the MSP, and have a better relationship. You solidify that workflow to become a partner at that end client level. So again, these configurations, there is a huge mindset. I'm going to apply these in every single break. It doesn't have to.
No, exactly. And I think if you're familiar with IG1, IG2, IG3 from a CIS risk perspective, you think about it the same way. L1, you are pretty good pushing all those out, right? And then as you start to go up, you may have some issues, but again, it's a control. You do it in, you do it like software deployment. You do it in rings, alpha, beta, and and you work outward from there. So again, speaking to services and professional services, this is a good way for MSPs to start building in professional service projects and going after accounts using something like this. Like, hey, we'll come in and we'll do this for you and we'll work with you in a consultative fashion. So.
Yeah. So, and then you can pre-approve, right? I'm assuming, Zach. So like if you got a HubSpot plugin or Office 365 plugin or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think Henry can talk towards that, but that's more the management of G Suite, right, Henry?
Yeah, you can set up a set of approved plugins, and then I think there's a process too where you can,
even if you're not a G Suite user, which most MSPs aren't, right? Like they're still going to have a Google admin account, I'm guessing, right? Is that right?
I don't know about that one. I'm not sure what the Chrome management looks like as far as plugins and things like that go. That's probably an Atacama question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention Atacama, and I don't know if Scott's on the call, but I got a lot of. He had a great webinar this week, and Henry or Zach, I don't know if you saw it, but you should check it out. Just cruise through it, but some great, a lot of overlapping themes in there. They also did Matt Lee's going to love this, a CIS vendor mapping for controls 1 through 18. I think there was probably like 5 or 6 controls, which. Not quite in depth. We're not there yet on that, but it was pretty good just talking about how they're addressing CIS controls.
Yeah, Matt Lee's been doing a really cool CIS working group, which I've had the pleasure of being on as well. So that's another thing with these. When you follow the recommendations here, a lot of them, see if I guessed one correctly, will map back to a control.
Right. There you go.
This is letting you know this is 4.8, and I guess just to kind of preview the slide that I made in preparation, right? Hardening your browser is going to assist in meeting about 8 of these CIS controls across 9 different safeguards.
I was going to make that point is, again, we're talking about using security as an innovative lever, not just a conservative lever or conservation lever. And that's another thing you can talk about is innovative ways to do your workforce is doing stipends for employee laptops, running everything through the browser and lowering your costs, right? So we can lower costs and actually increase our security. And if we're trying to get something like a SOC 2 or something like that, we can actually evidence and prove really easily that we're doing all the things we're supposed to be because we only allow entry through a browser that's configured and protected, right? So
that's a really good point, and something we talk about too is because these controls map back to other frameworks or regulatory items, and we design our reporting so you can do those tailored reports. Henry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jesse, do you know if the SOC 2 will allow you to scope directly to manage browsers as opposed to like the entire workstation?
It will. Well, it depends what's in scope, right? So yes, you can scope it to whatever you want, basically, as long as you're.
SOC 2 is an attestation; it's not a framework. Yeah. It's basically you have another framework on below it, right? Which is, as Jesse said, what's in scope. Go ahead, yeah.
So but my whole thing with it is, for better or worse, SOC 2 is what you're going to get asked for in a lot of competitive situations, especially in larger financial services or enterprise applications, right? So it's we can put our propeller hats on and talk about how it's not real security and all that. But my thing is we can blend both of those. Why can't we do both? Yes, let's make it real. So again, it's that innovative, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, use security as a force multiplier, right? Yeah, let's scope it down and get the certifications done, but let's also actually increase our operational output. And let's make sure that we're being secure and we're protecting ourselves better. We're giving less of an attack surface, right? So we're knocking 3 things out there with one way with one new innovative approach. And so I think when you start talking that way with your customers and thinking in an innovative fashion and using security as that lever, that can be very powerful as an MSP when you start to bring those kind of new ideas and thought leadership to your clients.
I love where you went with that, because that's something I actually really do encourage our partners to do. So a lot of MSPs today will have, their EDI tool, their whitelisting, their backups, right? A lot of pieces of security layers, a lot of the time very reactive, right? And not a lot of MSPs are taking this proactive step to change settings because it's the right thing to do. They change settings when something is broken or a CVE comes out. But what we're talking about in this webinar is changing the settings because it's the right security thing to do to prevent the next attack from being successful. So that's the big thing with this. And when you're talking about having MSPs elevate their conversation, that's what I want them to do when they think of configurations in Sention, right? Show them where they currently sit. Tell them, hey, I've been doing the best I can with the tools at my disposal to protect when a cyber attack happens. I've now matured that side of my business, and I want to take the next step with you. I want to proactively secure your environment. And that's where configurations can bridge that conversation.
Yeah. Talking about, yeah.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. So we don't want to let the cat out of the bag too much in Sention, like what you guys are doing. So just kind of walk me through it from a high level. You deploy the tool. How much of this stuff kind of auto configures, right? Like, so you don't have to read that 2,800 pages of documents, right, to create this dramatically, reduce this attack surface area. Like that's why I'm such a big fan of browser security. I'm so glad that like the channel is getting you guys and Atacama like this year. Maybe I'm sure there'll be more to follow, but like just walk me through like how it is hands off, right? Like, so you don't have to do too much of it, right?
Yeah, and I'll let Henry kind of go more in depth to this, but one thing I want to call out is the settings we're touching, only about 15% of them. So only on a workstation server and browser, only about 100 of that's not even 15%, but about 15% of the 1,300 settings we do are configured to the right state by default. So that's a ton of work. But Henry, yeah, please introduce more about how Sention works here.
Yeah, I mean, specifically targeting Tim's question there, I think the goal is that they have to do almost no reading or research. So we're actually trying to iron it down to the point where the only things you really need to look at are things that you've touched before or things that we're going to see are going to cause issues. Right? And that's going to be true for your browser. It's going to be true for your workstation, whatever it is. So ideally, if you run a really clean system and you are confident you run a really clean system, you probably won't have to read much of anything. Unfortunately, I don't think that generally is very true for most environments that we've encountered. And so probably maybe 20 or 30 of the, aforementioned 1,300 typically will have to look through more carefully, and then a greater 100 that they'll have to confirm to just say hey, I see that this is here.
Yeah, so I mean, if you A/B test it the way Jesse was saying, he recommends, these companies roll it out. So I'm sure it's fine. You've got a couple guinea pigs to shake out the kinks. So
generally how it goes.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing I mentioned earlier. Is even if they're on domain, your settings are not standardized, and something Sention does its best to try to do is let you know which ones aren't standardized, so that you can better create exception groups. And those ones that are misaligned, those are the ones maybe you want to read about. Maybe that's where you need to elevate your knowledge, because Sention can't tell you everything, but it will tell you where you need to look.
Yeah, that was my point, right? Is understanding what your template for settings looks like, and understanding, because again, that speaks to quality and repeatability. So we know if we deploy this subset of settings and we have a few off because we know certain tools or pieces of industries that we work with need them off, we can create less friction again for our clients when we roll this out. And so I think it's important, to do your homework and know, but also once you have that, to be able to move quickly, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One other thing we can talk about, we didn't necessarily dive too deep into the types of attacks that might happen to the browser. I know one that kind of surprised. Mm-hmm.
I was
Go
going to say
ahead.
I wanted to get there, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. I think that's a really good one to talk because it's all like, yeah, standardizing is good, hardening is a thing, but like, what risk is actually being mitigated? And I think one of the interesting things, if you look this up, like, this is reducing the risk of phishing attacks being successful. So there's
Right.
some settings in here that will harden. When you click an executable, well, a link, and you get redirected, right? It may trigger an executable, and you can configure your browser not to allow that, or spoof domains, right? There are settings within Google that are not on by default that can better predict if it's a phishing website, which I know is not the right word. But Henry, you could talk more about these attacks if you want.
Yeah, it's kind of like how an iPhone, because everything goes through Safari, right? Like Safari is a pretty locked down browser, right? Like by default. So, you click on that FedEx fish on your text, and it won't detonate your phone, right? So it's the same concept with your Dell laptop, right? So, yeah. Go ahead, Henry. Sorry.
No, you're
And
good.
we have like drive-by downloads if you want to introduce that, but I think cross-site scripting is another one we can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these things end up being really simple too. So, Tim, you were talking about, that's a long question.
Yeah, you guys can probably follow up. You guys should reach out to Zach or Henry, whoever. There's wherever this feed came from, but this could be.
That's
this
actually
could
a
be on
pretty
that.
good summary. So I think we did good in the webinar. That was pretty good.
Awesome.
You're not that far off.
Awesome.
You kind of described the learning mode that Sention goes through.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Henry, you're talking about the tax. Yep.
Yeah, so you were talking about the MacBook and the way the Safari prevents like the USB or USB.
Well, I was talking iPhone.
UPS,
Safari
yeah, the
on a Mac
iPhone.
is a little more dangerous. Yeah. Yeah.
It's about the same, I guess. But just the way those things work, there's like such little things you can do to help prevent those things from happening. My favorite sort of when it comes to drive-by security is just to say, like, if you can enable a setting so that when a file is downloaded, it asks you where you want to download it to, you can mitigate so many of those attacks just because you're going to see before it actually gets downloaded on your system. So just little things like that I think Safari does well. And it's possible to do it on your Dell laptop. It's possible to do it on Chrome that I think is pretty valuable. Things like cross-site scripting, all those items just generally come down to a bunch of configurations that, for whatever reason, they don't enable them by default, but you're going to probably not see issues with it. So a lot of those types of attacks are pretty easily preventable as long as we're sort of on top of it. And then, Zach, if you wanted to address that question.
Yeah.
The one that was, I mean, we were good on addressing the question before with the learning mode, but I know before we were talking about, what was it, the Great Suspender attack on Chrome. I think that would be a good one to
Pretender,
talk
wasn't
about.
it?
I thought it was Suspender. I can't
Suspender,
remember, but it
I
had
don't
to do
remember
with
the name.
it had to do with extensions, which again is something you can harden, right? You're blocking the third-party extensions. You're allowing only certain ones, but that's another good attack we can dive into.
Yeah.
No more honey shopping where you get the automatic promo
Yeah,
code.
unfortunately, taking that one away. Those are all watering hole attacks, right? So we're just talking about ensuring that you're only using approved applications so that you don't have a plugin that is maybe inherently benign but was breached on their end, and so then they're getting access to your browser and things like that. So just
the whole thing of you're just piling on supply chain risk with every browser extension you install, and I don't think employees are never going to think about it that way. They're not, so your best case is to limit that and try and educate on the back end, right?
The supply chain comment is actually really great for that, right? Because we treat applications you install, we treat software you install with so much care, right? That we have so many solutions around approved software, disapproved software.
Right.
Plugins are essentially the same thing.
Yeah, they are. You're just creating a piece. You're creating a Trojan horse into your network with every. I mean, if you could explain to your users that way, is that you are creating a Trojan horse into the interior of your network with every browser plugin that you install. That is what it is. And again, we talked about attackers being like water. Okay, yeah, they're locking down applications, they're locking down the endpoint. Well, where's the next logical attack surface? The browser and plugins. So
how else will I know what discounts Honey will give me when I'm shopping on company time?
Yeah. Obviously, malicious insider threat. I think I talked about that before, but clearly, it makes it really hard for an insider to steal things. So keep going. What else you guys got?
Well, one thing I'm curious, and I did do a webinar with Dustin about this on Fifth Wall, but we talk about hardening the OS and the workstation servers, and that is something that Fifth Wall values and cyber insurance is starting to ask to on forums. I'm not sure, and I'm curious if you guys know, is cyber insurance going to start caring about the integrity of browsers, or is that still out of scope? Any predictions on that one?
I think it's out of scope, but I think they realize, as you said, you're hitting 8 CIS controls, and just your risk buy down and affordability, right? Like, this is one tool that's going to be fairly cheap on a per endpoint basis versus the kind of, Jesse, that was another prediction I made. Like, people are going to start ripping some tools out, right? And replacing them with cheaper ones. So
that's what I was going to say is I don't see, I guess in the short term at least, asking about browser protection, but I do think that, again, it can be a creative way to meet insurance requirements for less. So if you need to say, for example, are you using MFA to access sensitive data? Oh, well, we have this old legacy server with that's sitting in the environment and it's just on an open network. It has sensitive data. We don't have secure MFA to it. What's to me, like, again, think like an attacker. What's the shortest path or the easiest lift to say yes on that MFA? Well, it's probably to put that thing in a segmented moat and access it through a secure browser that's locked down and has all the controls on it to get there. So it's, again, leveraging browser security and leveraging standardization along with a zero trust design to creatively meet controls while being the least friction for the business that you can.
Somewhere down the road, I can see them doing like car insurance, like the ODM port that goes in, and then you know how fast you're going. Like, how about an underwriter plugin for your browser? I mean,
you could, I could see that happening.
I'm
sure.
really hoping they learn a couple lessons on that.
Yeah,
I hope so, but
it definitely won't be a supply chain attack.
If you dramatically want, exactly. If you dramatically want to lower and have exposure on on their behavior, so. I don't know, but Zach, they're just so. It seems like they're always a year reactive on everything. So I don't know when it's coming, but
yeah.
Well, and cyber insurance may be reactive, and I think in the market of MSPs itself, we are, especially over at Sention, right? This is what we do. We are noticing a trend where MSPs are wanting to take that proactive step. Yeah. I don't think insurance is going to catch up fast. I think it'll take a lot of time. But at the same time, talking about the audience we all serve in this room, I do believe security is becoming that top of mind conversation. We mentioned CIS controls, mapping to 8 different ones just to harden a browser, right? Something you can do in minutes if you have the right automation in place, right? And I do believe MSPs are turning that corner to be more proactive.
Well, you have to be, right? If you don't take that next step, because it's always going to be market driven. Right. So the customers are asking for it now. It's no longer pushing this to the customer. You know, you are further commoditizing yourself, I think, as an MSP if you're not thinking proactively about these types of things. And, you know, if that's where you want to be, that I think that's fine. But I think most MSPs are trying to move upstream and trying to provide more trusted advisor type relationships with bigger clients, better paying clients, and just better relationships, right? And that's the way to do that, is to leverage thought leadership and proactive methodologies like this, like browser security.
Yeah. Couple minutes left. Maybe do some closing thoughts and get out of here a minute or two early.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Tim's not here. We don't have to be right on time.
Right on. I don't think we're ever on time. Henry, closing thoughts. Like, what's a good takeaway here for our viewers?
Putting me on the spot when I'm not ready for it.
Well,
gosh.
Zach can go.
I think you do this to me every time, actually. Every time I'm on the show, you lead with me on this. No. I think closing thoughts, probably best time is now to start thinking about the browser as your next frontier, right?
Yeah.
Somebody said they hate it when I say that, but it is sort of a manageable perimeter. It's smaller than managing your entire network. It's smaller than managing your entire system. And it does do a lot because everything goes through the browser. So I think it's definitely worth starting to think about that. starting to do the simple things, and then
Yeah.
sort of if you get started early before insurance is asking you for it, it's a lot easier to get it all done when it's absolutely required.
Yeah.
Yep, I think that's really good. And Heath, if you stay for one more second, man, my closing thoughts. What is an asset, right? I mean, a lot of MSPs today, and Matt Lee praises this, like, what is an asset? And I think a lot of people forget this browser is an asset of yours, right? This is an asset that needs to be documented, that needs to be standardized, that needs to be hardened, needs to be secure, right? And this concept of understanding what types of softwares, what type of hardware, controls 1 and 2 of CIS are so critical, and browsers is one of these assets. It is one of these assets that needs to be proactively managed, proactively hardened, and like Henry said, doing this stuff ahead of time, jumping the curve, being ahead of the curve is going to make meeting regulation, getting cyber insurance, and assuming you do it with the right automation with reporting, attesting to your security so much easier when the time does come.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, for me, I think the takeaway would be is that, I think people can sometimes get whiplash because it's like, oh, now we got to learn this, right? So it can be a little bit daunting, but I think, we chose technology because we like to learn. And so I think, starting to build kind of your talk track and your thought process and how you want to be ready to have these conversations with clients around something like browser security, and leveraging it as a business innovation rather than just a reaction to the industry. So that would be
I like that
takeaway.
phrasing a lot. That's really good.
Tim, what do you
So
got
my
for
closing
us?
thoughts. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think everyone's underestimating the importance of this here. I think it's equally or more important than most of the security stack. And the fact that G Suite is basically taken this browser-centric focus, and it's worked extremely well for them to provide a very safe environment. The world is SaaS, and the world of installed software is gone. And Jesse made a great comment about how, like that installed software, most of it's kind of locked down, right? And vulnerabilities, and why not go for a browser extension, right? Which is like just a Trojan horse sitting there waiting to attack. So I think that, you're just getting so much buy down risk from a risk perspective here that it's really important. It's really a no-brainer. You're going to dramatically lower your breach risk, your data loss risk. You're going to get a ton of analytics, and I really put that slide up really because you're going to have to sell this as a MSP or an MSSP to the business owner, and there's 5 good reasons right there, like that you can get them to buy it. So, those are a little long-winded on the takeaways, but
Those are good.
It was
Almost right to time.
Yeah. Thank you guys for coming on. This was one of my favorite episodes. Next week, Dawn Sizer, how she selects vendors. So
it's a nice one.
From, I think it's Third Element Consulting. Dawn is she's out on that conference circuit. So Tim should be back, but Zach, Henry, appreciate you guys coming by this week. And
Thanks for inviting us.
Really excited for the launch, and I guess it's coming in the next 90 days.
Putting me back
Sooner than that.
Cool, guys.
right.
1 minute back, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.